Greetings, Honorable Battle Brother.
Brother. Today we discuss the great nerd, Magnus the Red.
And his legion
and also
of
the Thousand
fellow
Sons.
nerds. Yeah, fellow nerds. Yeah, they're all nerds.
Yes.
But before we talk about the Thousand Sons, the big red boy, and then the smaller blue boys, we are going to talk about an anniversary.
Yes. Planning ahead, what is this, a professional podcast?
We don't do that here. March 16th, 2021 was an interesting day. Some of you may have had things going on, but to us it was the first episode. It was the first release episode of our conglomeration of words that we host every so often. Yes. So in honor of that, we will be doing a question and answer segment if enough of you participate.
Yes.
So if you have any questions on the lore, about us, about things we know, about things we might know, about things we don't know, email them to us at thebattlebrothercast@gmail.com, and we will compile them and ask your questions to everybody else as well. We will ask and answer your questions.
Yes, as we are wont to do, in our typical fashion of whatever you would call this.
So just fire off a question, include your name if you want your name included. If you want to give a message or a brief statement, then absolutely we'll include that. But other than that, if enough of you have questions, we will definitely answer them.
Yes. Just as a rule, if you put something in the email and don't we'll just probably read the entire email.
Yes.
So even if you don't put your name, we will probably mention from so-and-so at so-and-so. Right. So, yeah.
We don't really think things through here.
Yes. We did that once. So fun behind the scenes. We did that in the beginning with the Emperor episode, and then we decided that was boring and that we would never do that again.
Yes, of course. With that out of the way.
Preamble done.
Big Bird Boy now.
Yes.
Big Bird Boy and his small dusty boys.
Yes.
Magnus the Red, 15th son of the Emperor.
Yes. Yes.
Also known as the Crimson King, Cyclops, was the Primarch of the Thousand Sons Space Marine Legion. He was, obviously, everybody had their own little shtick. Magnus being the most powerful psyker in the galaxy.
Yes. He was a big wizard.
He was Wizard Boy.
Literally,
he was big nerd wizard. Yes, he was taller than the other Primarchs.
Yes.
He had red skin.
Yes.
Eventually, he would lose one of his eyes.
Yes.
And he kind of did this cute, quirky, fun psychic projection thing where he would make himself look bigger than he was. Just like the Emperor.
In the grim dark future of the 41st millennium, people will still compensate over nonsense, which is why his entire suit of armor was covered in horns.
Yes, and especially after he falls, he just grows more horns everywhere. It's weird.
Yes.
But, turning back the clock, we see Magnus land on a planet called Prospero. Outside of the main city of Prospero, called Tisca. And Tisca looked like a weird sort of, like they had pyramids and it was still kind of snowy. It was a weird kind of environment. It essentially was Space Egypt. It was Space Egypt, yeah.
It was Egypt.
So Space Egypt, Prospero, was a prosperous world. The cities were filled with scholars and all kinds of smart nerds.
Yes.
There was one of the arch mentors here, one of the highest and most knowledgeable individuals was a man named Aemon.
Yes.
And Aemon found Magnus and quickly began teaching him everything he knew.
Yes.
It didn't take long, obviously, for Magnus to eclipse Aemon in power and psychic power and obviously physical prowess. And there was a lot of warp fuckery going on Prospero at this time.
Yes.
And
we should mention, Prospero was a wizard planet. It was a planet where everyone was a psyker to some degree. Where to be in a certain place in the hierarchy, you had to be a psyker.
Exactly. And it's weird because, like, literally everybody was a psyker. Like, in one of the books, I think it was the Thousand Sons Horse Heresy book, they talk about even the wait staff at restaurants would bring you what you want before you ordered because they knew what you wanted. So, like, even the average day citizen had some sort of psychic potential, which is, and it's a different concentration than anywhere else in the planet.
The quantum tunneling bacon, egg, and cheese on toast.
Exactly.
Delicious bacon, egg, and cheese 2 seconds before you realize you want it.
Exactly. They know before you do. So eventually, Magnus grew up. He had a pretty lush childhood. I think he's the only traitor Primarch who lived in kind of a nice planet.
Well, technically Perturabo.
Yeah, true, I guess.
Barring court politics.
Yes, exactly. Barring the politic of the world.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, how much detail do we get about Prospero?
A decent amount. So it's...
Okay.
There's maybe 3 or 4 books of the Horus Heresy that talk about Prospero in some extent. Albeit one of them is after it gets glassed.
And not just how it was glassed.
Yeah, one of them is about that, but... there is a little bit that we know about Prospero, how, there's a lot of old, ruins on Prospero that, like, archaeologies are going through, and they're trying to find, like, more, STC templates, and Magnus is searching for knowledge. That's a constant theme, though. Magnus, who is... Knowledge. He was the knowledge boy. So Magnus... Okay, so I was getting ahead of myself there. Magnus had eventually grown to essentially to be the Cyclopean king, or he wasn't a Cyclops at this point yet.
Yes.
He
had both his eyes at this point.
Yes, he had both of his eyes. He became Archwizard Boy of the planet of Prospero.
Yes. He was the Harry Potter.
He eventually founded his own sort of school of wizardry called the Cult of the Thousand Sons. Yeah. So eventually the Astartes would arrive with the Emperor. So the Emperor had previous conversations with Magnus before he even found Magnus on Prospero.
Yes.
Because
they were both psychic wizards.
They're both psychic wizards, and they could speak from across the galaxy to each other. So they had probably the closest relationship. So much so that the Golden Throne was designed for Magnus. So eventually...
Hey, son! Look at this big chair I made for you. It's super cool. You should probably try sitting in it someday. I mean, it's just a chair. It's just a really cool life support chair. Nothing bad will happen when you sit on it, Magnus.
So originally nothing bad would happen if he sat on it. So we'll get to why something bad does happen. Magnus and the Emperor would have conversations across the galaxy, Magnus on Prospero, the Emperor on Terra. But the Emperor had always constructed the idea of utilizing the Eldar webway to circumnavigate the galaxy without utilizing warp technology. Because it was his ideology. We talked about it in the first episode, but that was fucking a year ago now. It was his ideology that humanity's utilization...
Chaos is bullshit, and we must have nothing to do with it.
Exactly. By utilizing warp technology, chaos will always have a root in humanity's existence. So, by utilizing the webway, that would circumnavigate intergalactic travel without use of the warp. Therefore, the warp would become meaningless. Eventually, the Chaos Gods would suffocate and die. They would starve.
Yes.
There wouldn't be any food, which is kind of untrue because they feed on raw emotion, but it's whatever. It was a well-conceived idea.
Oh, we can talk about that. We can talk about that whenever we start talking about Magnus and Tzeentch.
Yes, okay. So, the Emperor knew where Magnus was. The Thousand Sons, which had suffered a horrific gene mutation that limited...
Yes.
We talked about this with Fulgrim as well. Fulgrim's Emperor's children had suffered a horrific gene mutation that had only left about 300 Emperor's children alive. Well, guess how many thousand sons were left before they met their Primarch?
1,000.
1,000 of them, yes. So they were
Did
reunited.
You know, apparently... No, go ahead.
I was just going to say...
funny.
Okay. I was just going to say they were reunited, and Magnus, in turn, in a way to desperately, like Odin, looking for answers, Magnus desperately turned to powers out in the warp to find a way to save his sons from this horrific gene mutation. So he sold his eye for knowledge.
Okay. So I would like to mention that apparently, when their gene seed was implanted in the first Legionaries, there was a warp storm in the solar system. The solar system of Earth. Our solar system. There was a giant chaos hole that opened for no reason. And according to Lexicanum, this brief warp storm was said to have generated psychic flashpoints all across Terra's globe, resulting in outbreaks of madness, suicide, and random violence. Whether it had any effect on the Legion's gene seed is doubtful, but upon learning of it years later, Magnus himself considered it to be a poor omen.
Which is never a good thing when Magnus himself was like, I don't know about this shit. It's not a good sign.
Yes. So Magnus found out about that. So that happened, and then there were only 1,000 of them left. So Magnus heard a whispering in the night. Yeah. And the whispering said something to the effect of, you know what's better than having both your eyes? Knowledge.
Knowledge.
And then Magnus woke up and was missing an eye, but his sons kind of survived.
Yes, so his sons did survive, and they were stable enough. The gene seed stabilized somehow, so that there was enough stabilization so that the 1,000 Sons Space Marine Legion could be born. So let's talk about them a little bit.
Yes.
They were divided into... Go ahead.
No, I'm looking at stuff.
Yes.
It says that it was made... The Terran 1,000 Sons came from this place called the Achaemenid Empire. Achaemenid Empire.
Achaemenid Empire.
Blah, blah.
Yep.
Yes, blah, 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 blah.
Guess where that was?
Blah. I think this is just Egypt.
Egypt. It was Egypt.
Yeah, Dul Qarnan.
Yep, it was Egypt.
Just Egypt.
I've looked at maps. It's Egypt. It's literally it's the Upper Nile Valley. Well, what was the Upper Nile Valley, and it extends into like old Saudi Arabia. That was the Achaemenid.
Egypt.
Yeah, it was Egypt.
So does this mean that every portrayal of Magnus is wrong and that he should sound like the voice actors for Trazyn and Orican from The Infinite and the Divine?
That would be kind of interesting. Yeah, so Prospero was cultured as he was stylized as Egyptian, but he was raised on like, I think they were just like normal like Imperial Gothic. Technically, though, like all the original 1,000 Sons should be sounding like that. Yeah.
Ahriman definitely.
Ahriman should, yeah. And Ahriman is described as an olive-skinned, darker individual. So I mean, there's a chance that that's sort of carried over. So the organization of the 1,000 Sons was a peculiar one. Mm-hmm. They didn't have companies, as it were. They had fellowships. And the fellowship was the typical structure. And they had a kind of superseding organization in addition to the fellowships called the cults. And there were 5 cults of the 1,000 Sons Space Marine Legion. They were like non-organizational divisions. They were like, just sort of like, oh, you're one of these? Okay, you belong in this group. And it's not really made clear why. Like, it's physically, it's because certain individuals possess certain abilities. but why would you organize your entire legion on the basis of 5 psychic powers?
Well, you see, Magnus got his hands on an ancient tome called Harry Potter.
I was gonna say, it's
And
like, just like the
thus,
Harry Potter
when
houses.
he gained access to his legion, he thought that it would be a great idea to model his army of mystical warriors, just as this ancient training place of mystical warriors, Hogwarts, the Academy
Yes.
of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And so he did. He sorted them into the nice people house, the hero house, the nerd house, and the bad guy house.
Yeah.
Except there
Just
was
like
one
that.
more.
Except there was one more. Yep.
Yes.
So the 5 main cults, there was the cult of the Corvidae, which was specialized in precognition, which is seeing the future. There was the cult of the Pyrae, which was the pyrokinetic, generate and create fire. The Pavoni, which could use their psychic powers to change how they looked and changed how other organic organisms looked. Weird.
I see.
And then there was the cult of the Ateneans, which were telepaths,
Okay.
and the Raptora, which could use telekinesis.
Okay, so for those of you who don't want to speak Latin, in order, it was crow, phoenix, pigeon, raptor, and eye.
Yes, exactly.
So those are the Hogwarts houses of the Thousand Sons.
And then apparently there was a 6th house, a 6th cult, that never really got actually created, called the Aquilae?
Yes. The Eagle Men.
Yes, exactly. Which is ironic that the Eagle house was never established, right?
Yes.
The Aquila,
because the Emperor
the sign
didn't
of
like
the
to
Emperor.
share.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, he didn't like to share. He only let Fulgrim have the Eagle one because he was his favorite.
Yeah. Also, they turned to chaos before they could,
Yes. Yes, exactly. I also like how it describes it as a pyramid.
Yes. So,
Anyway.
the Thousand Sons were organized into 9 fellowships. The first captain of the first fellowship, the first fellowship captain, was also the same person who was the chief librarian, and his name was Azek Araman. Yes.
Yes. Did you know that Araman is actually the name of the Zoroastrian god of evil?
I did know that, yes. I have read books about the Zoroastrian.
Yes.
There was also notable other members were Aemon, the man who literally found Magnus. Yeah, he was turned into a space marine, unlike everybody else's parent. Because magic...
Which is stupid!
Yep.
Time out. Let me click his name again. He was a grown man when he found Magnus,
Yes.
right?
Yes, he was.
And so was Corferon.
So was Corferon.
So why are they allowed to be space marines?
Magic.
But Corferon wasn't magic.
Corferon wasn't made into a space marine. Corferon had genetic enhancements and was given Terminator armor.
Oh. Huh.
Aemon became a space marine.
Right, yes.
And he also became equerry to Magnus.
He was magic.
He was magic, yeah.
Yes. He was magic.
Yes.
He also had face tattoos, which made him look like a D&D villain.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So they were talking... Oh, wait. The Book of Magnus.
The Book of Magnus was the creation of Magnus. Was essentially the Book of Lorgar, but for Magnus. It was basically a book of magic. It was the Necronomicon.
Uh-huh. Yes. Except it's legally distinct from the Necronomicon. Please don't sue us, the
Please
people who own
don't
the Evil
sue
Dead.
us. Please don't sue us. legally
The original is still
distinct.
within the library.
Legally distinct and different Necronomicon. So, Prospero was a flourishing world with the introduction of the Astartes and the Thousand Sons Space Marine Legion. Also, can I just say how cool the Thousand Sons armor is? Heresy.
It is very
during the
cool.
Heresy era,
Yes.
post-Heresy, pre-Heresy. Fuck me. It's like this
does look very
scarab red, and they have like
Yes.
weird, cool symbols all over it, and the scarab obviously because they're Egyptian.
Yes, it looks super duper Egypty.
It does. It's
Their
very good.
swords look like
Khopesh.
Their swords look like Khopeshes.
Yes, exactly.
I forgot what the plural of Khopesh was.
Yes.
The ancient Egyptian sickle sword.
Which is very
Which
on
means
key.
that yes, they look Egyptian, which means that any second now someone's going to make a joke about Necron sending them a cease and desist letter because they did it first.
Yeah, right? That'd be funny.
Yeah, that'd be a very funny joke to make if only someone had made it.
If only somebody made it. GW, if only somebody made that joke.
Yes.
Moving on. The Thousand Sons would join the Great Crusade. They would lead a kind of prosperous career. Unfortunately, their pursuit of knowledge got in the way of actually doing a lot of good for the Imperium. So there was a lot of grudges made because the Thousand Sons would dip out of combat to like look up the local library sort of thing. Like they'd be engaged on a world and then they'd stop fighting, like because Magnus would say, "Listen, fellas, he's got like books and shit in his library, so we can't go to war with these people."
Like, gentlemen, cease fire immediately. Do you know what this is? No, Commander. This is the last borders in the universe.
The last
We must
Barnes and
build-
Noble.
Yes, we must fortify this position immediately. And then Rokal Dorn's eyebrow twitched for a second. He's like, I feel someone has said my line.
Yes, exactly. Knowledge.
This joke will continue.
So the pursuit of knowledge led to unsavory, kind of consequences. So much so that the Emperor was looking at the Thousand Sons and said, "Hey, I don't really like what they're doing with the whole warp sorcery bullshit," which was a problem.
We should clarify. It's not just warp sorcery. They were these guys had like little Zinch demon familiars a lot of the time.
So they called them tutelaries.
Yes.
They were literal demons that the Thousand Sons summoned as familiars, as little pets and sources of knowledge. And yes, that is gonna come back.
Yes. So everyone, picture for a moment the Emperor, big shiny golden man, checking up, or anyone really, any other Space Marine Legion that's not Thousand Sons, coming to visit your local, doing a joint operation with the Thousand Sons, and then you meet their leader, and then he has this little tiny green thing running around singing Rebecca Black's Friday in this horrible voice, which is horrifying, but you can't crush it because, that's the dude, because the Thousand Sons commander is like, you can't kill Steven, he's my most prized tutelary.
Yes.
It's Friday, gotta get down on Friday. And then they're just staring at it like, that's a demon. I have to kill it, it's a demon. It's like, it's not a demon. It's not a demon, it's a tutelary. But everyone knew that every single Space Marine chapter had dudes that looked at that thing and went, that is evil.
A literal conversation that was had between Araman, Isaac Araman, the chief librarian, and a rune priest of the Space Wolves called Othwir Weirdmake, was about the literal demon that Araman summoned in front of Weirdmake, and he was like, that's a fucking demon. And then Araman was like, nah, it's just my pet, my guy. Shut the fuck up.
We should clarify, because I don't think we've talked a lot about the different flavors of librarian that we have.
We vaguely touched it, but we definitely can.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We definitely can. So every single Space Marine chapter has their own flavor of wizard. The Space Wolves, as we mentioned, they have shamans. They have these more shamanistic librarians that are called rune priests. So what they do is they channel the warp into elemental things. But they know that the thing that if you do enough space magic, something will smell it and follow you. Because, they have a concept of like, if you make enough noise, there will be predators that will be attracted to the noise.
Ripples in the ocean.
Yes.
Which is a fitting metaphor because the Thousand Sons used the term Great Ocean to describe the warp.
Yes. And instead of seeing the fact that there were, oh my god, there are thousands of predators, like everyone else did, they were like, oh no, these things, they're harmless. Look at it. Newgrounds. Perfectly harmless. Look at it.
Look at that. Look at that little gremlin thing that's spitting blood on the ground, spitting blood and acid all over the ground. Look at it. It's adorable.
Yes, and every other Space Marine Legion was horrified by this. And they all told and eventually the Emperor got reports of these horrible things where these dudes are fucking summoning Sangors and shit.
Yes, exactly.
And then the Emperor's like, we need to have a sit down, Magnus. This is some shit you're doing and I don't like it. And then Magnus was like, nobody understands, you don't understand. I am the only one who knows what I'm talking about. And the Emperor's just like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
In so many words.
And that shut the fuck up came in the form of a literal trial that was held on a planet called Nicaea.
Yes, excellent segue.
So Nicaea was a very unstable world. It was essentially a volcanic, destabilizing world, which is fitting because, and they talk about this in one of the books, I can't remember which one, but they're like, hey, it's really ironic that the trial of Magnus the Red is going to happen on a planet that will no longer exist in a few decades, to kind of wipe that stain off of the Imperium. So it essentially was a planet that all the Primarchs and their kind of escorts were invited to, where Magnus would defend along with some of his brothers, such as, I believe, the Khan and Fulgrim.
Jagatai Khan and Sanguinius.
Sanguinius, okay. They would...
Sanguinius specifically.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense, though.
Because lest we forget, the last time we spoke about Glorious Hawkman, Sanguinius also has psychic powers.
Yes.
Precognition. All the Primarchs have psychic powers, but his are noticeably, like, these are psychic goings-on, and not like, what's his name? Not, how did I forget his name? Lehman Russ's Assassin's Creed-style counter button that he had.
Yeah, yeah. So, Nicaea was a planet, so Magnus the Red would defend the use of sorcery. He proposed... So, he made a very strong argument. Unfortunately, Magnus blatantly lied. And I think the Emperor knew that he lied. So, I don't know if all of you are familiar with the works of Plato and Socrates. During the trial, Magnus makes reference to a piece written in Plato's Republic, talking about men locked in a cave. And the cave was dark and repressive, and eventually they light a fire. And they use the fire shadows to make depictions of reality on the walls. And lo and behold, one of the men in the caves, and this is I am butchering this, but I hope you understand what I'm getting at. Eventually
It's the man in the cave. Everyone at some point has heard the man in the cave, but continue.
Yes. So one of the men eventually breaks out of this cave prison and finds the world above. And the world above is green and it's beautiful and the sun's shining and it's paradise. And when he comes back down to the cave, and here's where it differs a little bit. In Magnus's story, I believe he says that man gets hoisted as a god, as he is now the greatest among us. He has discovered the truth, and the truth is worth any means. Now, unfortunately, in the actual story, I believe he gets beaten to death.
He does.
So
that is the point. I believe he does mention that, because in Lexicanum it says that he mentions that, he he strove to show his friends the truth despite their rejection and disbelief. So I believe the thing he's doing is, I am the man who dug beyond and saw the world beyond what we see now, and I'm trying to share that with you, and now look at this that's going on. All of you are trying to censor me. This is not fair. Cancel culture.
Cancel culture. So that little misinterpretation, or willingly altered story, is very emblematic of Magnus, as he thinks he is in fact infallible. He thinks he's better than everybody else. He has that air of superiority because he thinks he understands the reality of the world and of the great ocean and the reality of the warp. He doesn't.
Yes.
He is another pawn being moved around a board by a disgusting mass of emotion called Siege.
Yes. Yes. Also, do you remember the moment that starts the that makes people go like, we need to have a sit down?
I don't.
Lehman Russ watches a Thousand Sun go through the flesh change.
Oh yes, of course. Yep.
So the flesh change is what a Thousand Sun basically going through, converting into a Shoggoth.
Yes, exactly. They basically turn into a H.P. Lovecraft,
a horrifying
eldritch
writhing
abomination,
mass of flesh and tentacles and spikes
which
and
is
dead memes.
which is literally a chaos spawn.
Yes. So Lehman Russ watched that happen and was like, I have sat down and I have put up with Magnus doing his weird nerd shit, but this is too far. And then Mortarion, who hates wizards because he's basically a medieval peasant with wings,
Yep.
was like, see, this is what they do. This is what the nerds do when you give them half a chance. They start turning into weird monsters. I lived on a necromancer planet. How long until the worlds of the Thousand Suns turned into demented hell planets run by monsters of flesh and transformed flesh? And so that was when everybody sat down.
And that's when
Because
Magnus
everybody
was put
had
on trial.
librarians.
Everybody
Yes,
had librarians.
everybody
Most
had
of them.
librarians.
Most of the chapters
Yes.
had librarians. Yeah. Most of the legions.
Except for
Mortarion.
the Death Guard.
The Death Guard. Yeah. I think that was it.
Yeah, just Mortarion. Everybody else had librarians in some capacity, but Mortarion was the only one who had a hardline policy on it.
Right.
Because the argument for it, the Council of Nicaea, was always kind of, the wizards are useful. We need the wizards because the wizards, on average, our wizard, like a lot of the, like Sanguinius spoke a lot about, not all of the librariuses do that. We have librariuses. The Khan has storm seers. And those guys can harness the power of the warp without turning into horrible, chunky salsa monsters.
Exactly.
So that was the argument for it. And eventually, after some time, everyone was like, well, how do you have proof that you can not turn into horrible nightmare monsters? And that by using chaos that will not attract the horrible nightmare monsters? And then they were like, well, you see, but no one listened because this was the people on the opposite side of this trial were people like Lehman Russ, who does not listen to people.
No, there's no listening going on.
Yes. So eventually, blah, 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 during the Council of Nicaea, this is an important event, but we're glazing over it. Constantine Valdor was here.
Constantine Valdor was there.
Yeah, so that's how you know it's important. The chief custodian was there. Amon tried to assassinate a custodian named Alman Taromachian.
Amen Tarmakian. Yeah, he's big in the
Yes.
Terra.
Yes, and Amon was stopped by Bjorn the Fell-Handed. And
Bjorn, the
then
oldest living space marine.
Yes. Bjorn, the oldest living space marine. We talked about him at length in the Space Wolves episode.
Yeah.
And this kind of moved things in a direction, because if you're in a debate and you do some reactionary shit like this and you're already losing, this kind of cements you wherever you were going to go already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and eventually, I think regardless of whatever was argued at the Council of Nicaea, the Emperor would make the same decision, because this was all a show. This wasn't a trial. This was a farce. The Emperor was going to censure Magnus the Red. He was going to forbid the utilization of warp magic, and the Thousand Sons were going to have to change, or they wouldn't survive.
Yes. Except, Lehman got to keep the shamans, and Jagatai Khan got to keep the Storm Seers.
To a limited capacity.
Didn't get in trouble. Yeah. Everyone got to keep librarians to a very, very, very minor degree.
So it talks about a lot how after the Emperor's decision to forbid warp usage at the Council of Nicaea, the librarians of each legion were to be disbanded.
Yes.
However, you cannot remove psychic potential from somebody. So these individuals would just be folded back into line operation. They would become standard legionnaires again, until the Horus Heresy breaks out, when they literally needed to use warp magic to fight the fuck off large demons that they were fighting that normal bolt rounds could not put down.
Yes. So the Emperor did not. During this whole thing, it was unproven that Magnus was a sorcerer, even though he is the leader of the Legion of Wizards.
Yes.
And no one at all was like, what if the king of the army of wizards is a wizard? What if he is the magical Trevor?
Right.
But no one thought that. And the Emperor personally said to Magnus, and I quote, "If you treat with the warp Magnus, I shall visit destruction upon you, and your legion's name will be struck from the imperial records for all time."
Kind of
And
reminiscent.
Magnus, of what happened to the other two.
Yeah. A little bit.
So Magnus knew that he could be, at any moment, the Emperor could just point to the Thousand Sons to say, delete them, and they would just be gone.
Yes. Yeah, so eventually, that's exactly what would happen.
Yes.
So Horus Lupercal would eventually get stabbed with a little knife on a planet called Davin. And this would send Horus into a death spiral, whereupon Erebus, using warp magic, would entreat to him the will of the Chaos Gods.
Yes.
The Corvidae, Ahriman's cult, would foresee this, along with Magnus the Red, so they collectively attempted to intercept this and warn Horus of the heresy to come, essentially.
Yes.
And try to convince him that bowing to the Chaos Gods was not the right decision. Unfortunately, Horus heard what Magnus was saying, but was so convinced by the lie is a strong word, by the half-truths that Chaos was telling him. We will talk about this a lot more next time when we talk about Horus himself.
Yes.
Eventually, though, Horus would choose Chaos, and Magnus, in a kind of rushed state of paranoia, used a similar ritual to attempt to contact the Emperor and warn him of what was happening with Horus. So Magnus traversed the warp in astral projection form and would come to a barrier at a point.
Yes. And at this point, a bunch of strange songs started playing through the air. And then as the strange song got closer and closer, a little blue bird flew onto Magnus's hand and was like, "It looks like you need some help there, buddy." And so Magnus made a deal with this bird and absorbed the power of Tzeentch, and that was how he broke a hole through the Emperor's half-finished webway tube and then opened up a giant demon hole in the Golden Throne.
Yes. So, Magnus made a deal with Tzeentch.
Yes.
Magnus used the power of a Chaos God to punch open a hole in a barrier that he came across. Little did he know that that was the webway. He opened a breach into the webway to traverse it, to attempt to find the Emperor. He eventually finds the Emperor, and in showing up, not only were the demons a problem, but he also short-circuited and ruined the fragile technology that was being installed to operate the Golden Throne. So the Golden Throne, from this point on, would be broken.
Oh. And the Emperor no one would be able to fix it.
Yes.
Because,
So the Emperor, in a very harsh realization, saw that Magnus had fucked up everything. That's where the Magnus ruined everything trope came from. The Emperor had to then, from this point on, sit on the Golden Throne in perpetual agony, or else that hole that was ripped in the webway would expand infinitesimally large, and the demons would surge into Terra, onto every other Imperium-controlled planet, and the galaxy as we would know it would cease to be.
Yes. So, at this point, the Emperor was not willing to listen to Magnus. As one can imagine, he burst in and the sounds of memes from 2005 were playing as an army of Sangors and Slaanesh demons prepared to destroy everything. So he basically just grabbed Magnus by his very long hair, threw him out of the throne room, told him to never come back, and then sat on the Golden Throne and bore the brunt of the eternal rickroll that plays in the warp.
Exactly. And it was as a response to this that the Emperor would decree the censure of Magnus the Red.
Yes.
Now, the form of this would be in the Emperor's executioner, Leman Russ, the entire Space Wolves Legion, a detachment of Adeptus Custodes, led by Constantine Valdor, the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, as well as a detachment of Silent Sisters, who, guess what they do? They repress warp. Because they
don't just repress warp, they make Psychers want to die.
Yeah, sometimes Psychers literally die in their presence.
Yes.
Because it's a literal absence of feeling.
Yes.
So they would march on Prospero. Unfortunately for Magnus, about halfway through that transit, Horus got on the little telephone with Leman Russ and said, hey, Leman, listen, so the Emperor changed his mind, and what Magnus did, there's no going back from that. I mean, you might as well just kill him, right?
Yeah.
And then Leman Russ very enthusiastically agreed.
Yes. It's like, for too long he has been telling me, he has been calling the phone and telling me, hello, yes, is this dog? I have grown sick and tired of him and his weird statements that make no bloody sense.
Yeah. And
I will see this erasure dealt with.
And so he would fucking kill his brother Magnus the Red.
Yes.
So Prospero is invaded by the Space Wolves, the Custodes, and the Sisters of Silence. Unfortunately for the Thousand Sons, for about 3/4 of the battle, Magnus the Red was crying in his room. He would not fight his brother. He would not defy the will of the Emperor. Until shit really hit the fan, and his sons were being absolutely massacred by the Wolfen, because that's how much Leman Russ wanted to fucking murder his brother. He unleashed the fucking werewolves he keeps chained up in his basement.
At that point, Magnus had enough. He said, no longer shall my sons be massacred by Leman Russ's weird degenerate persona monsters. This ends. And he clanged his staff on the ground and tried pointing and he pointed the biggest gun he could at Lehman Russ and screamed, Avada Kedavra! Before Lehman Russ grabbed him and then knee dropped him in half.
Yeah, and then Bane snapped his knee, his spine over his knee.
Yes.
About halfway through this battle, the Thousand Sons, so overwhelmed, cried out even, for their tutelaries to help them channel the power of the warp. And you know what they did? They ate their souls instead. The tutelaries were obviously fucking demons, so when the Thousand Sons who bound them, who summoned and bound them, were weakened by the apparent loss of the battle,
yes.
The tutelaries said, okay, cool, I'm gonna consume your soul now, and maybe even possess your body. And so that's exactly what happened. At the same time that happened, the flesh change started fucking up the Thousand Sons again. So
Yes.
a lot of them were turning into weird chaos spawn. Magnus was Magnus was putting up a fight. He punched out one of Lehman Russ's 2 hearts, which was an achievement. Lehman
Yes.
Russ then broke and shattered Magnus's body over his knee like a goddamn psychopath.
And it is said that Magnus screamed in a way that can only be described as megalovania.
Oh my fucking god.
There will be more of this, and I will explain my logic in a second because we're building up to something here.
Okay. So, eventually, Magnus's body was shattered, his soul fragmented, and in a last-ditch effort, Magnus called all the power he could manage, as well as entreating to the same entity he made deals with in the past for extra power. He transported the remainder of his sons, as well as himself, to a mysteriously shimmering planet in the Eye of Terror, known as the Planet of the Sorcerers.
Yes. And at that moment, that same shimmering face appeared again and said to Magnus, all your souls belong to us. And then most of his legion vaporized into dust.
So yeah, the flesh change was taking place at a rapid pace now, and in an effort to stop this, Chief Librarian Ave Imperator cast a little tiny spell called the Rubric of Ahriman.
Yes.
And what the rubric did was all of those suffering from the flesh change would essentially be turned to dust, locked in their armor forever.
The process made a very distinct sound. Avery, in post-production, please edit in several vine booms whenever we say the word Rubric of Ahriman.
Okay.
There should have been a vine boom after I said that.
I understand.
Rubric of Ahriman.
Another one.
Yes.
So the rubric was cast. Those not psychically gifted enough would become rubric Marines. Rubric Marines were unintelligent automatons bound to the will of a psyker. Ahriman would immediately regret this shit.
Yes,
so much
because they could only speak in references that no one understood.
Yeah, exactly. And they were just melancholically depressed all the time.
They communicated exclusively in cut up lyrics of emo songs from the early 2000s.
Naturally.
So it's like, hey, Brother Terenius, how are you doing? I walk a lonely road, the only road that I have ever known. Vine boom sound.
So the rubric would be the greatest and most infamous achievement of Ave Imperator, so much so that he would spend the remainder of his life, which is ongoing currently, trying to reverse this.
He's still alive.
That's why you'll see a lot of memes of him not having a library card. He's trying to get into the Black Library to find something to reverse the rubric.
Yes. He's trying to find the sacred and legendary cheeseburger
Yes.
of the Kirker Bing Chimkin Numgit.
I fucking
I'm just
despise
saying
you.
words. I'm just saying words at this point. So now it's time for me to explain why I'm doing this bit.
Okay.
Because now we get to talk about now that we've mentioned Aramin and the rubric of Aramin, Vine Boom, and the rubric Marines. Every time I say the word rubric, there should be a Vine Boom.
You're asking a lot of me, my guy.
That's fair. I could do it if you want. So, the rubric Marine. Sorry. Zinch. Zinch communicates with knowledge. So his entire method of, hold on, let me rephrase. I had a plan for how I was going to take this. Zinch's entire purview is knowledge. Knowledge and conniving, the application of that knowledge, where Zinch is the god of change, where, Zinch is the god of Zinch is the god of your Wile E. Coyotes, but also of your Sherlock Holmes, the people who devise the mysteries and the evil conspiracies, and also the people who, foil said conspiracies through planning and trickery. So, by that same extension, Zinch communicates to others in ways that most people would think indecipherable, which is why no one from Prospero knew that they were, technically servants of Zinch, even though they too would summon tutelaries and such. They didn't know that all these things that they summoned were fragments of a larger whole, but they knew that these things, existed because Zinchian demons manifest to those who seek arcane knowledge. And they speak a language that no one understands based on symbols that make sense to no one save for those who understand them. What does that mean? It's a cryptic riddle, much like the sound of one hand clapping. It's not supposed to make sense to a logical person, because Zinch's logic is, by definition, indecipherable by the average mortal brain. So Zinch's demons, and thus by extension his servants, are logicless, are driven by logic in the case of Aramin, or are visible logic by, the description of Aramin, or logic that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, like any other Zinchian demon, such as, your Sangors, your Changing Horrors, and all the other creatures that were used as quote-unquote tutelaries.
Right.
Because, by their definition, their sense of logic is ever-changing and constant. Yet, constant and inconsistent, yet internally consistent. Much like memes. Particularly dead ones.
Yeah.
Why did I make the jokes about the Rickroll and the Vine Boom? Because it makes no sense, and therefore was a logical maneuver and a means of misdirecting you from the fact that I couldn't really think of an original funny gimmick to give the Thousand Sons. So that's why I'm basically gonna say shit like Magnus does have cheeseburger knowledge. Because that is how Zinch communicates. Zinch communicates to people through, not directly, he communicates with the average person through visions and dreams that are indecipherable, save to those who are capable of understanding them. Much like this conversation much like these jokes are indecipherable, save to those of you who were present for these eras of internet history.
Yes.
So there is a logical reason why, as you visualize the burning of Prospero, the ultimate showdown of Ultimate Destiny song should be playing. Avery, I need to be sent a copy of this, even if you don't do all the ridiculous editing nonsense. I will.
Okay. So eventually the Thousand Sons would be teleported to the planet of the Sorcerers, where they would regroup, and they would eventually make their way to Terra for the siege. Now, they were here for the Siege of Terra, however, they were not really participating. The reason they were on Terra was to recover one of the shards of Magnus's soul, who was embedded in a individual who became known as Janus, and that was essentially the loyalist shard of Magnus, was sent to Terra. Janus.
Oh, right, Janus as in the two-headed god, and not Janus as in Janus the librarian woman.
No. Janus as in one of the founders of the Grey Knights.
I see.
Janus was the teacher of Grandmaster Kaldor Drago. Janus was the harborer of the loyalist shard of Magnus's soul. So that's what they were doing on Terra. They very quickly realized we don't really belong here. They left. They regrouped at the Planet of the Sorcerers, and then the Legion essentially fragmented into warbands. One of the most prominent members, besides Azek Araman, of course, of the Thousand Sons Legion, is Iskandar Kaon, who's one of my favorite characters in modern 40k. Iskandar Kaon, also known as Kaon the Black, or Kingbreaker, was a sorcerer of the Thousand Sons. He was vehemently outspoken against Araman's rubric, so much so that he attempted to kill Araman during the casting of the rubric. He would eventually solo fight Magnus the Red in full Ascendant Demonhood, and would win. This motherfucker was hard. He also was one of the few members, he was one of the founding members of the Black Legion. He was one of the Isakarian, one of the inner circle of Abaddon during the formation of the Black Legion, and would journey with him to conduct the Black Crusades.
Right. Do you know what's funny?
What?
Iskandar Kaon was close with a Dark Eldar scourge named Nefertari.
So Nefertari was actually bound to Iskandar Kaon. It was his personal, companion.
So we don't need to make jokes about Bob anymore. Now we got Iskandar Kaon and his weird elf woman with wings.
Yeah.
Named Nefertari.
She was weird.
Totally not just weird elf goddess Isis.
No, definitely not.
Ancient Egyptian mythology.
Nope, can't be. That's not right. Nope, not here. This is intellectually distinct. Sorry?
Yes. As I'm sure we all know, GW has never ever ripped anyone else off. Ever.
Never. What? Never. You hear that, GW? See how loyal I am? You know what you should give me? Space Marine 2.
We should both have Space Marine 2.
So, Iskandar Kaon was present when Ezekiel Abaddon killed the clone of Horus during the Battle of Harmony, and would be there when the Black Legion would consolidate most of the traitor forces. That was the only one I cared enough to talk about.
Okay, because we talked about Airman, we talked about who the fuck is Tolbeck?
I don't know.
Tolbeck was a former member of the Thousand Sons Legion. He was an adept of the Pirate cult during the Great Crusade. Blah blah blah, blah blah blah. He was part of the Airmen's Fellowship to reclaim the shards of Magnus. After Rubric's failure, he was exiled from the Legion. He joined Amon's warband. Blah blah blah, blah blah blah. A monster killed him. That's it.
Irrelevant.
He was brought back maybe through time nonsense.
Oh, interesting.
We should talk. So, please explain to me what so Magnus's soul was fragmented.
Yeah.
At what point do we go from the Assassin's Creed style hunt for Magnus fragments to full demon Primarch?
There isn't much time in between. So when he teleports the Thousand Sons to the planet of the Sorcerers, Magnus is not physical anymore. Magnus has no physical corporeal form. He is literally just energy in the shape of a Magnus. And he coalesces himself with the shards of his soul that he could find, becomes physical again, enough so that he ascends to demonhood. It gets confusing. And then he eventually... So he's fully ascended. There is a point when, in the 41st millennium, when Rabute Gilliman is attempting to traverse his way back to Terra, Magnus intercepts him in full ascendant demonhood, and that's where we see... That's when he got his new model. For that. So that's when we know for a fact he's ascended. I assume he has ascended during the Siege of Terra, like just before or after, but I'm not 100%.
Okay. I am still so when I am confused because how do we get from... So that's when Magnus has his... Magnus goes from shards to demon, and then after that, what happens to the rest of the pieces? Oh no, here it is. It says what happens to the rest of the pieces. Not much.
Not much.
Magnus is still alive.
Yes, Magnus is still alive.
Magnus is still alive, and Magnus is able to yell at Aramin.
Yeah, multiple times.
Yes. And, blah, 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 blah. Magnus tried besieging the Space Wolves planet again.
Yes.
It didn't take.
It didn't go well. Mainly because Bjorn the Fell-Handed woke up and then kicked the shit out of Magnus.
Yes. They just kind of sat down like, Leibniz is gone. Wake up, Bjorn. Bjorn will deal with it. And Bjorn did deal with it. Dark Imperium happened. And that's it.
Yeah, and then that's
what
modern day. Aramin's still trying to break into a library.
Yep. The Thousand Suns are off, being wizard nerds with their horrible, gibbering demon creatures.
Yes, indeed.
I feel, should talk, now that I had that weird segue about Tzeentch and how Tzeentch does his weird... Tzeentch communicates. We should talk more about Tzeentch's, like, the demons that would fight along with... along with Magnus. Because, we talked a bit about Korn with,
Scarbrand.
Yes, we talked a bit about Scarbrand. Does Scarbrand work with the... No, Scarbrand will not...
No, none of them work together.
Yes. Scarbrand hates nerds.
Scarbrand hates nerds. Scarbrand also hates illiterates. Scarbrand hates. Just Scarbrand.
Yes.
So the demons of Tzeentch, obviously they're the big ones, the Changers of Fate. That's what Kairos Fate Weaver is. He's essentially a two-headed, massive fucking bird. One head tells truths, the other one tells lies. Nobody knows which one's which. Kairos is one of those weird ones that exists both in fantasy and 40k. Just like Scarbrand. It's weird.
And Nakari.
And Nakari. Yeah.
And the Great Unclean One, what's his face?
Plague Father.
Yes.
Or Utter Blight. Or both.
Yes.
I don't know. Nurgle's
all
weird.
Of them. Yes, all of the demons exist in both worlds.
Which is interesting.
But the Great Horned Rat does not exist.
No horned rat.
Yes.
Don't you know, Anisius, that Skaven aren't real?
You're right. How could I have forgotten that?
Skaven denialism increases, intensifies.
Yes. Exactly. So... I feel like there should be more to talk about with the Thousand Suns, because they're the wizards.
Yeah.
They're Egypt wizards, and they should have more stuff to talk about, but they kinda don't.
Nah, I mean, they're like Zangors, which are essentially blue beastmen. There are the weird horrors, the very many colored varieties of them. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I don't think Tzeentch has many demons.
Oh, he doesn't.
I'm doing a think. I don't think he does. I think that's it. There are blue horrors, red horrors, or pink horrors. There's Zangors. There's the Zangor shamans. I'm literally, in my head, I'm going through my Thousand Sons army. There are Changes of Fate. There are just Demon Princes of Tzeentch. I think that's it.
Yeah, we should clarify. You have you're building a Thousand Sons army.
Yeah, they're very painful to paint, though, because their models are so old and fragile.
Yes.
So when I'm not painting Raven Guard, I'm painting Thousand Sons.
It is weird. Like,
I have 600 points of Thousand Sons right now, which isn't a lot, but it's enough.
Yeah, it's enough to be able to, like, talk more about them than we have.
There's nothing to talk about.
Yes.
Aramin is the only one that gets any kind of notification because he's the chosen of Tzeentch. That's it.
Yes. There's other ones, but they're just nerds.
They're just nerds.
And they're not that special.
No.
Well, him and Kaon and his elf girlfriend.
Kaon is the only not nerd.
Yes.
Kaon was called the Blade of Ezekiel because he just assassinated all the problematic Chaos Lords. That's not a nerd thing. That's a cool badass thing.
Yes.
Oh, Screamers. Screamers of Tzeentch. That's another demon. They look like flying manta rays.
Oh, that's cool. In conclusion, GW. Fix. You have 9th edition. You brought Necrons back. Fix. That is all.
And that's the Thousand Sons.
Yes. Tune in next week where we talk about future space Mary submarines, aka Horus and his army, the Luna Wolves, aka Sons of Horus, aka the only one whose name the Emperor remembers, aka author self-insert character.
Yes. Garviel Loken? Wow, I relate just like Garviel Loken. I'm just like him, says anybody ever reading a 40k novel. Okay, we'll talk about that next time when we talk about Horus Lupercal and the Little Wolves / Thousand Sons / Black Legion.
I have one more joke I need to make.
Do it now or forever hold
Number
your peace.
15, Burger King foot lettuce.
Okay, we're done talking now.
Yes.
Join us next time.
Ave Imperator.
Ave Imperator.